Exporting blocks with attributes to Excel. This will be our final method to develop into our plugin. So we are going to export, or we are going to develop a method that will export all the attributes from a block. So let's go over the high-level requirements for this task. So we have our drawing. Some of these objects here have a blocks with attributes, and this will be the format or the columns that we are going to extract. We have here the block name, the layer, rotation angle, the insertion point X and Y, and the list of attributes. So regardless of how many attributes the block have, we are going to extract them all into a spreadsheet here. And our flowchart will flow something like this. We just select all the block objects and loop through the selection set. Then we are going to validate if the block has attributes and it's not an anonymous block. So if the block has attributes, then we're going to extract these properties. Again, the block name, layer, the rotation angle, the insertion point X and Y, and the list of attributes. So no matter how many attributes the block have, we will all extract them into the spreadsheet, and then it just loop through until all the blocks have been extracted. So that's about it for the high level. In the next video, we're going to develop the program to do just this one here. I'll see you there. Okay, let's continue building our plugin. So in this video, we're just going to create a button to export the blocks with attributes. However, since we would like the user to export specific blocks, we will be needing a separate form. That form will display all the blocks with attributes, and then once they select on each block, they will have a chance to see all the attributes from within the block. So all of the coding will mostly be happening on that form. So in this video, we're just going to create a button so that we can create an instance of the blocks form, the one that we're going to create, and then all we have to do is display it. So let's copy the existing button here, Control C and Control V, and let's just change this to export a specific block, and then we change the name to BTN export block. So now if we double click on this button, it will give us the method. So what we're going to do is just call the blocks form. So let's create a blocks form now so that we can have a reference to call it. So right click on the solution file and add Windows Forms. So let's just call this as blocks form. Okay, so now we have the blocks form. Then we go back to our code. Now we can create an instance of that form. So basically display the blocks form. So dim blk form as new blocks form. Then now we can display it, blk form that show. And in our form, in our blocks form, I would like to create a field so that the form will know where is the call coming from. So view the code. Let's just create here a field and call that as public file type as a string. And for now, that will be the code for the blocks form. We will further develop this in the upcoming videos. So this is just kind of all the preliminary requirements so that we can call from our Excel util form, and then we can pass on the parameters that we will be needing in the blocks form. So in this case, all we have to do here, blk form.file type, then let's just say it's coming from the Excel file. The reason being I created this field here is that we will be building more methods that's also coming from the text files and not just the spreadsheet. So, and we have different parameters for those methods. That's why I decided to create a separate field called file type, so that when the user clicks on the button, they know that it's coming from, let's say, from the Excel, or you're working from the Excel spreadsheet. And later on, once we develop the methods for the text files or CSV files or pipe delimited files, the blocks form knows that it's coming from those files as well. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to continue building on the blocks form user interface. I'll see you there. All right, going back to our blocks form, let us start building it. Let's just set some properties to, let's say, the minimize box. Let's just set it to false. The maximize box, let's set it to false as well. And then for the text, let's just call that as blocks form. Now we can drag some controls. The first one is the list box. So this will be the list box to display all the blocks with attributes. So let's call this as LST blocks. And another one, we need another list box for the attributes. So let's call this as LST attributes. And then let's just provide some label here. Let's say we call this as list of blocks, and another label here to inform the user that this is the list of attributes. Okay, and we will be needing a button. First one is the export button. So let's drag one button here. Let's call this as BTN export. Let's just do some changes on the color. Set to navy blue for the background color, and the fore color to white, and font to bold to true, and text to export. And the size, let's just change the size to 120/35. Alright, so this is our export button. But since we will be needing this form also when we do the import, so I might as well add the import button now. We will build on the import button later on, but at least we have all the user interface ready. So we have here the import, and the name we just call that as BTN import. and change the background color to orange and the forecolor to black. Okay, so this will be our user interface for the blocks form. In the next video, we're going to code the form load event, which means that when this blocks form load, we have to display all the blocks with attributes right away. We don't need to wait for the user to display the blocks. So once this form load, all the blocks in the drawing, blocks with attributes, will be listed in this list box here. So that is the next task that we're going to develop in the next video. I'll see you there. Alright, so let us now code the form load event. So by double clicking on the form, it will give us the blocks form load event. Okay, so before we start coding in this event, there is one method or function that we need to gather and collect all the blocks with attributes for us. And then once we have that, we can then bind it as a data source to our list box control. However, we're not going to code the collection or the gathering of blocks from within this Windows form, from within this blocks form. We will do it in the common util form or common util class here. So let's do that. Click on common util, and this time we're going to develop a method or a function called get block names with attributes. So we're going to create here a public function. Remember, it's a function because function returns a value, while a sub does not return a value. So public function get block names with attributes, and that will return a list of string. We only need the block names, so it's just a collection of strings, a list of strings. Alright, so next let's create a selection set variable that will be ss as selection set. Now we need also a document object, so dim doc as document equals application dot document manager dot mdi active document. So next we can populate our ss selection set variable here by calling the get objects method and passing in the string parameter, which is insert. Remember this? This is the method that we use to select all the object types that we need, and it will gather all the object types based on this filter or based on the object type here, and then it will return to the calling method. So in this case, all we have to do is get objects, and we pass in the insert string parameter, and then it will gather for us all the blocks. And next we need to create a list, or a list of string, so that we will populate that with the block names. So dim blk list as new list of string, and now we can loop through the selection set. So using the trans object, transaction as transaction equals doc dot transaction manager dot start transaction, we can now loop through the selection set. So using the for each method, for each selected object. Let's just call that assobj, as selected object in the selection set. We need a variable, a blk variable, to store the object from a selection set. Then we can cast it into a block reference. So blk as block reference equals, we will use the try cast, and that's coming from the trans.get object. That will be the object ID of the selected object, and the mode will be just for read, and cast it to a block reference. Okay, so now here's the validation routine here. So only gather blocks with attributes. Also ignore anonymous blocks. So to do that, we have to provide a condition here, if condition. If not blk list that contains this, the first one is to make sure that the list does not have a duplicate entry, block name, and blk that attribute collection that count is greater than 0, which means that it has an attributes, and also the not blk name that contains an asterisk, which means that we are ignoring all those anonymous blocks. Then what we have to do now is add into the list that add blk the name of the block, and that's it. Then once it's done looping through all the selected objects, all we have to do is now return the blk list. So now that we have this method, we can go back to our blocks form, view the code, and then we can create now a new instance of common util. So dim, let's say cu as new common util, and let's also create a list or a list variable of string. So dim blk list as list of string. This will be the variable to store the block names that we are getting from the method get block names with attributes. So now blk list equals common util that get block names with attributes. Now that we have this list, we can now bind it into the lst blocks list box. So lst blocks dot data source equals blk list, and that's it. So let's save our code here. Now we can try this to display the form, but we will do that in the next video. So I'll see you there. Okay, now that our form load event is complete, we can start running the program and see how it goes. But just before I click on start, there's just one change that I would like to make in the Excel util form. That is when we click on the button. So if we check the code behind this button here, I initially coded as block form that show. So I would like to change this to show dialog. The difference between those two methods is that the show dialog will lock the screen, which means that only one screen is active, while the show method is it will create a new form every time you click on the button. So we don't want that to happen. We only want one active form that the user can interact. So let's keep it at show dialog. Now we can build our code and test our plugin. So let's click on start. Okay, let us load our plugin. This is the plugin here. Now let's type in show Excel util form. This is our plugin command. Okay, so now we have it here. If we click on the export a specific block button now, it gives us this blocks form dialog. See that? I cannot click anywhere. There's only one form active, which means that it restricts the user from doing something else while the form is active. So this is a good thing. So that's it. Our code works to display all the blocks with attributes. So in the next video, our task is to display the attributes of the selected blocks from this list box control on the left here. So at least the user has some idea on what are the attributes that's going to be exported to Excel. Okay, so let's do that in the next video. I'll see you there. Okay, let's continue building our blocks form. So currently we only have the form load event for this blocks form. So in this video, we're going to complete coding the displaying of attributes of any block that is selected from this list box. So if we double click on this list box here, it will give us this selected index changed event. So again, before we start coding on this event, we need to have a method that will give us all the attributes from that block that we have selected. So we will do that again from this common util class. So let's go over here, and we're going to create a method called get block attributes. So let's do that. Public, it would be a function because we're going to return the list of attributes. So get block attributes, and we will be needing one parameter, which is the block name. So we call that as blk name as a string, and we will be returning a list of string, which is the list of the attributes. So let's just put a comment here, get all the blocks attributes, and returns a list of attributes. Okay, so let us create a selection set to gather all the blocks. So dim ss as selection set. And now we have to gather all the blocks. But the thing is, we have already a method here called get objects. This one will return all the, any objects that we specified in this object type. So in the previous video, we have used this object to gather all the blocks from within the AutoCAD drawing. So we will make use of this also. However, there is a second parameter that we need. So we can pass on the insert, something like this here, but we also need to pass in the block name so that it will only filter out the blocks, the blocks by that block name. And then based on that, we are going to filter out or extract all the attributes. So in this case, let's just copy this over. We're going to overload this method. Overload means creating the same method name, but it has different method signatures. In this case, we will be adding another parameter. We'll call that as block name. Okay, then that will be block name as a string, and that's it. So in this case, all we need to change here is the filter, the type value. So let's just replace this 67 with the block name, or cint dxf code dot block name. Okay, and that will be the block name that we are passing here, and that will be the second entry in our filter, in our type value. And that's it. So now we have overloaded the get objects method. We can actually create a logic here to kind of validate if there is a second parameter, but let's not just do that. Let's just leave this method alone and just create an overloaded method with an extra parameter. So in this case, this will be the method that we're going to use. Okay, so now that we have these get objects, let's go back to our get block attributes method, and then we can continue building on that. So now our SS will be equal to get objects, and we pass in the insert as the first argument, followed by the block name, the BLK name. So whatever we received from here, we'll just pass it on over to this get objects method. And then we'll just do the same checking. If selection set is nothing, then just return nothing. Otherwise, continue working on the code. So we need the document object. Dim doc as document equals application that document manager that MDI active document, and we will be needing also a variable to store our attributes. So let's call that as dim att list, attribute list, as new list of string. Right, now that we have that, we can start with our transaction. So using trans as transaction equals doc.transaction manager that start transaction. Now we can do a for each loop to loop through the selected objects in the selection set. So for each, let's call that again as SOBJ, as selected object in our selection set. So we need to have a variable to store the value for this selected object here. So we will create a, let's just call that as bref, as block reference, and we're going to cast. So we use that try cast method to cast that entity, that's get object selected object that object ID open mode for read, and we cast it to a block reference. Okay, Now we need to check if the block has attribute. So to do that, we have to make an if statement here. If bref, the block reference, that attribute collection, that count is greater than 0, then we have to loop through the attribute collection. So to do that, we will be needing another for each loop. So for each, let's call that as at reference ID or at ref ID as object ID in block reference that attribute collection. Okay, and now we need an object variable, so let's declare an obj as db object. That will be from the trans.get object, this at ref ID object ID here. So at ref ID open mode for read. And now we need another variable that is the attribute reference. So to do that, we have to create another variable. Let's call that as at ref as attribute reference. You can name any variable you want, but this is just closer to the actual entity type. And we will try cast. We will use a try cast to cast this obj here as an attribute reference. So try cast obj as an attribute reference. There you go. Okay, now if at ref is not nothing, just to make sure that it has a valid value, then it is a valid object, then we can now add the attribute into our attribute list here. So att list that add, that will be the attribute tag, the at ref that tag that to string. Okay, so we don't need the value, we only need the tag, because that's just the attribute name that we are going to display. And all we need to do now is, so we only need to have one pass, because they are all the same blocks anyway, and they have all the same attribute. So once we gather all the attributes using this loop, all we have to do now is exit the loop for this outer loop here, so that we don't go through the same process again. We already got what we need, so that's good. That's good for us already. And now we can just return the attribute list. There you go. And now that we have this method, we can go back to our blocks form and go to our selected index change, and we can apply the code here. So let's create a variable called dim blk name as a string, and let's instantiate a common util class dim cu as new common util. So the block name now is equal to the list box, or that is the lst blocks that selected item. Okay, so this is the selected item in the list box. So now we can create another variable. Let's just call that as att list, as list of string. We will use this to store the list of attributes that we're getting from the method that we just created earlier. So att list equals to cu dot get block attributes, and we pass in the block name, which is this one here, the one selected by the user. So blk name. And now that we have the attribute list, all we need to do is bind it into the list box. So lst attributes that data source equals to att list, and that's it. Our code is complete. So let us save it and do a build, rebuild, and we can test it out. Let's see how it goes. Alright, so let us load our plugin, netload. This is our plugin here. Now show Excel util form. Okay, so let's click on export specific blocks button. There you go. So now we have the blocks and we have the attributes here. If I click on receptacle, we have the attribute. There's only one. We click on door French. We have 7. So this door French and bifold has the same attributes list. And this switch and receptacle has also the same attributes. And that's it. So in the next video, we are now going to work on the export button. I'll see you there. Let us now complete our method export blocks with attributes. Before we start coding, let me just move this over at the bottom here, since this is the last method from our form, so we'd rather put it at the bottom. And just one more change, or actually two. Instead of friend, let's just use it as public, just to be consistent with other methods. Actually, friend is the default access modifier, which means that from within the same assembly, then you can use this. But since we have created all of our method as public, let's just make it as public. And at the same time, we're going to return a value. So we will return just the result of our process here. So instead of sub, let's change this to function. Okay, and we return a string, which is whether our exporting is successful or not. And now we can start coding. So the first one is to gather all the blocks with attributes. So the same thing as what we've done from the previous videos, we can create a SS variable. We can just directly call the get objects from the, let's just initialize first the common util. So dim cu as common util is the one that equals new common util. And now we can create our selection set, which is equal to the common util that get objects. Then we pass in the parameter here, which is insert and the block name. Okay, so now we can validate if SS is nothing, then just return a message saying that no blocks found in the drawing. Otherwise, we'll continue with the process. So in this case, we're going to initialize or declare a variable. Let's just call that as result as a string, and then initialize it to an empty string. Okay, so now let's start with a try catch block. So in the catch code block, we'll just have to say result equals error encountered, and then we'll just concatenate the message or the error message, and at the bottom we have to return the results. That's it. And now we can start coding inside the try catch block. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do here is to connect to Excel and get a worksheet. So dim ws as worksheet as new Excel dot worksheet. Now we have to call on the get Excel worksheet method. This will give us the worksheet. Then we can just provide a name. Let's just say blk name. So whatever block name that we passed onto here will be the name of the worksheet. Okay, this is not necessary. I mean, this is just optional, but just for our program's consistency with the other process that we started earlier, we just have to name the worksheet with the object type, and in this case the block name. So next we have to create the fixed column headers. When I say fixed, these are all the block name, layer, the rotation of the block, and the insertion point X and Y, the coordinates. Those are the fixed ones. They don't change. And those other ones that are dynamic are the attributes, which means that depending on the number of attributes, then all of them will also be extracted to Excel. So in this case, we just have to create a range as Excel.range. Then now our range would be worksheet.range, and then just specify here the A1. And now the value of range is the header, so let's just call that as block name. And then we can just copy this code here and then paste 5 more times. So the next one is the B1, which is we're going to extract the layer. And the third one is the rotation angle. So let's just call that rotation. And the fourth one is the D1, which is the insertion point X. And the fifth one, that is the E1, insertion point Y. Alright, so now we have the fixed header. Next, we can now loop through the block attributes and get the attribute tag. So that will be the F column, and depending on how many attributes we have, then that will be just keep on going until we display all those attribute tags as a header. So what we need here is a document object. So dim doc as document equals application dot document manager dot mdi active document, And let's also declare a variable for the attribute value. Let's just call that as attr val as a string and initialize it to an empty string. We also need a variable like the row number as integer. This will track which row are we processing already based on the number of iterations that we will be doing. And also the column number. Let's just call that as colnum as integer. And we initialize this to 6 because now we already have 5 columns here from A to E, and the next one will be column number 6. So using the transaction, using trans as transaction equals doc.transaction manager that start transaction. Okay, next we have to have a for each loop. So for each selected object, let's just call that assobj as selected object. In the selection set, we'll create a variable called, let's just call that as blk as block reference, and we will do a try cast to cast the object, the sobj, the selected object, into a block reference. So that will be coming from the trans.get object. Then we pass on the selected object.object ID. Then open mode for read. And we cast that to block reference. Okay. So next we have to add the attributes tag name in the header, and this is just to be executed once. We just need one block and retrieve all the tag or the attribute name, and that's it. So if row num equals 1, this will be our indicator that we just start from the first row and we exit right away, and after that will be followed by the actual value. So for each, now we call that as at reference ID. This is the attribute reference ID as object ID. In the block.attribute collection, so dim obj is the object as db object, and use the trans.get object. That will be the at reference ID, open mode for read. So this is basically the same thing as what we've done from the previous video, when we retrieved the attribute. So now let's just create another variable called @ref as attribute reference equals, we do another try cast to cast the obj into an attribute reference. Okay. So next we have to check if the attribute reference is not nothing, then we will list the tag name as one of the header. So in this case, instead of using the constant one or the alphanumeric range here, we will be using the cells from the worksheet. So worksheet dot cells, this will be the row num, which is we initialize as 1, and then the column number, the column, which is we initialize at 6. So this will be the next header. Then that value for that cell equals at ref that tag. And then we'll just have to increment the column number. So in this case, we just have to column, use the plus equals expression to increment by 1, which means that every loop iteration here, the row still remains as 1, the first row, but the column keeps on incrementing by 1 until we reach the end of the attributes, which means that by the time we have already created all the headers. And that's for the header. Next is we have now to continue extracting the blocks, but this time we are more interested in the actual value already. So increment the row number and set the column number to 5, which is the after the y coordinate or the y insertion point. So row num, that would be equal to plus equals 1, and the col num will now be equal to 6. Okay, so loop through the list of attributes and write to Excel one at a time. So in our case, for the layer, for the block name, for the rotation and the coordinates, we'll just use the same process as what we've done here. So ws dot range, and for the block name, for the first column, we have a, and concatenate the row num. This is row number 2, and the value for that will be the block name, blk.name. So we just copy this 5 more times, and now for the next column, the B column, that would be the layer, and for the third column, that will be the rotation of the block, and for the fourth column, let's make that as capital D, come on, and that will be the blk.position, which is the insertion point, dot x. And finally we have here the fifth column, which is E, and that will be the position dot y coordinate. Okay, so now we have all the fixed values. And the last thing that we need to do now is loop through the block attributes. So we do another for each loop. So let's call this as for each at ref ID as object ID, in the blk.attribute collection. So we're looping from the block collection, or I mean the attribute collection. So again, we do the same thing, just use another object here, dim obj as db object equals to trans.getObject, that will be the @ref ID, and open mode that for read. And again, we just have to create another variable here as attribute reference, and we will use the try cast to cast the obj into an attribute reference. There you go. And now we can extract the value. So the value of the attribute equals to @ref.textString. Okay, that is the value of the attribute. And now we can add into the spreadsheet, into the cell. So worksheet cells, now the row num followed by the col num, which is starting from 2, which is the second row, and then the col num, which is column 6. Then the value of that range will be the attribute value, and that's it. And of course, make sure that we don't forget to increment the column number or the col num. So col num would be plus equals 1, otherwise it will stick to the same column number 6. So in this case, this is the col num. Okay, so every loop iteration here, it will increase by 1, which means that column number 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on, depending on how many attributes the block have. And finally, all we have to do now is create a message as a result saying that successfully extracted blocks to Excel. And that's it. This will be our complete code for our export blocks with attributes method. Alright, so in the next video, we're going to test our export blocks with attributes. I'll see you there. So now that we have completed the export blocks with attributes, we should be ready to test it. So let us save our project and do a rebuild. Okay, one succeeded. So let's start our program here. Okay, let us load our plugin. Netload. This is our plugin. Now we can type show Excel util form. Okay, so again, let's click on the export specific block, and here we go. We have all the blocks with attributes. So if we click on export, the expectation is Excel will open up, and then it will extract the layer, rotation angle, and the insertion point X and Y, as well as the block name and all of these attributes here. So let's start with the bifold, for example, or let's just try the bifold and click on export. There you go. So we have here the block name, we have the layer, we have the rotation, we have the insertion point X coordinate and the Y, and we have here the symbol. See that? Symbol, height, style, reference number, manufacturer, the cost, and the width. So all of these attributes have been extracted dynamically. And that's it. So you can just save it to any folder you want, and you have all your attributes in Excel. Alright, so this concludes our tutorials on exporting to Excel. In the next video, we're going to move to the next section. I'll see you there.